everybody, it is Randy with Carchaeology, and I want to take you through the history of the Kiddieland Fire Truck. Now, this is a really interesting vehicle, as you can see. This is not a normal single cab truck, but that is exactly what it started out as. So the two Kiddieland trucks were purchased in September of 1959. They were purchased brand new from a Volkswagen dealership, and they were brought directly to a company called Darley that is a manufacturer of fire trucks. Now, when these cars were purchased, or these trucks were purchased from the dealership, Kiddieland was the buyer, and they requested that some panels be removed, and they actually got a credit from the dealership for removal of some body panels. Now, I assume that means the side gates, perhaps the treasure chest door that would have normally been on the factory body for the single cab. Obviously, those weren't needed with what was going on here. And so the stripped down version was delivered to Darley, that was at the time located in Melrose Park, Illinois, very close to where the park was. Now, there's some question in my mind as to which one of these trucks was done first. Now, there are signs and photos and information out there on other Darley transformed single cab trucks for other amusement parks that are in the area. There was one called Fun Fair that was located in Skokie, Illinois. There's another one called Hollywood Kiddieland that was also in the area. There was one called Kiddie Town that I believe was also somewhere in the Midwest. And some of these trucks appear to be a little bit older than these. In fact, a couple of the ones, or at least the photos that I've seen of the Fun Fair truck, that comes up as a 1957, looking at the little rear light on the deck lid. The one existing Fun Fair truck that's known out there is a 57. So it's possible that those trucks were done first for those different amusement parks, and maybe the owners of Kiddieland saw them running around town since Darley was located there. But whatever the reason, they purchased these trucks, they brought them over to Darley, they had them converted into a fire truck with the plan of them being used to cart kids around. So the deal was, if you had a birthday party in the area, you could call up Kiddieland. They would send the fire truck out to scoop up the whole birthday party and haul them over to the park. Now, they did that for free, which was great. But, of course, they charged the kids for admission to the park. But it was a great thing. The truck would come around the corner, the bells would ring, the siren would go, the kids would run out, they would get up into the back of this thing, and they would ride off to the Kiddieland Park for a day of fun and probably all sorts of cotton candy and sugar and whatever, and then be dumped back off on their parents at the end of the day. Now, I've come across a few people that have actually ridden on these trucks when they were kids. On my way home from the Octo show, I actually came across a lady that was almost in tears seeing this truck. She came to California many, many years ago, but she grew up right in Melrose Park, and she rode this very truck. So there's a lot of emotional tie-in to these vehicles, and it's really important that they are preserved. So the plan with this one, as well as engine number 2, is absolute preservation. No modifications are going to be done with them. They're going to be kept original, perhaps some minor mechanical upgrades and changes just to make sure that they're reliable and safe. But the whole idea is to bring these trucks out there into the world again and share them with folks. Maybe we'll even give some kids a ride and that sort of thing. However, today's a different day. Back in the 1960s when they ran these things, I mean, there were no seat belts in the back. It looked like at one point they did a single seat belt that went across the whole back there. Perhaps that happened at some later date when somebody said, shouldn't those kids be belted in there? I mean, these are icons of a different time. These are trucks that you probably couldn't get away with using in today's world. You know what? Send your kids off with total strangers in a fire truck to town? Sounds a little creepy. But back in the 1960s and 70s when these were used, that was commonplace. It was all about fun, good family fun, and Kiddieland was the place to go in Melrose Park. And let me give you a little history of the Kiddieland Park. So it all started with a guy named Arthur Fritz. Now, he started in 1929, right at the peak of the Depression, with starting something for kids. So he had a construction business that was failing as a result of the Depression. He was having a hard time paying his bills. He took all of his savings, he paid off anybody that he owed money to, and he shut down the business. And with what little money he had left, he actually bought a handful of little ponies. Now, I think a lot of people probably thought he was insane. What are you doing buying horses at the start of the Depression? I mean, you do need to feed these creatures. But there was a method to his madness. And the method was that even in times of hardship, parents are going to do what it takes to bring some joy to their children's lives. And it worked. So he would charge for rides on the ponies. That ended up building up into, well, what ended up being Kiddieland that ran all the way up until 2009. Now, at the time when he was doing the pony rides, the name Kiddieland didn't exist. That actually didn't come into play until the 1930s when he was really doing some park expansion. Now, he tried to copyright that name, Kiddieland. However, the courts wouldn't let him do it. But it is kind of widely known out there that he was the first one to use that name for an amusement park for kids. Now that name has become synonymous with amusement parks all over the country. There's even a line of toys right now called Kiddieland. They even make a toy fire truck. But Kiddieland was, it ended up being kind of a genre type of park that was designed for the youngest of us. Little rides, you could ride on your fire truck, you could ride on a little tractor, you could drive a little go-kart, you could ride on the Ferris wheel, a merry-go-round. They had a roller coaster. They eventually had a log ride at one point. And it was a really popular destination from, well, when he started it in 1929 all the way up to 2009. Now in 2009, the world was changing. Not only were the generations of the family that started it changing, but property values were starting to climb in the area, and they realized that the land that Kiddieland was on was a really expensive chunk of dirt. And well, it ended up becoming a chunk of dirt. It was purchased by Costco. They leveled the place. They put up a big Costco shopping center, and Kiddieland was no more. They had an auction of a lot of the equipment and memorabilia from the Kiddieland auction in 2009. And unfortunately, it was kind of poorly attended. The weather was really cold. Things sold super cheap. Some of the most amazing rides and stuff that were there in the park, including a little drive-em carousel that came from Europe that had cool little Vespa scooters and neat ornate buses and a little 300 SL and an Alfa Romeo, really bitchin' 50s looking stuff. I think that sold at auction for about $32,000, and some number of years later it sold at Barrett-Jackson fully restored for over $500,000. So the family was a bit disappointed with the results of the sale, but what was done was done. Now the Kiddieland trucks weren't a part of that auction. They were kept by heirs of the family. So I believe it was a granddaughter and a grandson each got one of the Kiddieland trucks. And they stashed them away, probably along with other memorabilia from the park. And there they sat. So where I came into the picture, or let me back up a little bit, from the gentleman that I got these from, where he came into the picture, he's a car collector there in Illinois, and he happened to live next door to the granddaughter that had truck number 2. And at one point, she was packing up, moving to a new location. She offered the truck to Mike. Mike said, sure, I'd love to have it. He obviously wanted to keep some Chicago history there in Chicago, and so he grabbed truck number 2, and he put it into his collection. Now, he's not a Volkswagen guy. He's just a car guy. But he also saved some other things that were from the park. There were some giant fiberglass masks that were on the buildings there. One was a hobo, one was a clown. He saved a couple of the Kiddieland tractors that were there. He even saved one of the drive-em old cars that were built for the park. It was one that was actually never put in use. But he held on to that. He also ended up with a ton of memorabilia and ephemera from Kiddieland, stuff that he has loaned to historians that are now documenting all of that stuff and sharing the Kiddieland story with others. In any case, sometime later, he was driving around truck number 2 and he was blowing the siren and giving a ride to a friend of his. And a man came around the corner and was basically kind of freaked out. "What are you doing with Kiddieland 2? He said, "I have Kiddieland 1. Now, this was the grandson of the founders of Kiddieland, and he had taken Kiddieland 1, this truck here, to a farm that he had, I believe, in Minnesota or somewhere out of state. But Mike mentioned to him, "If you ever want to sell it, let me know. I'd love to have the whole fire department together." And eventually that happened, and both trucks ended up in Mike's garage. Now, this is where the story gets very interesting, at least for me. So the stuff that Mike had loaned to this historian has been used to do historic presentations at local libraries and things like that. So this lady was at a library giving a presentation on Kiddieland and other Chicagoland attractions. And one of the guys that was sitting in the audience was a guy named Brett. Now, Brett's a Volkswagen guy. And it just so happens to be that his wife had actually ridden on one of the Kiddieland trucks as a kid. So when he saw the slide of the Kiddieland pickup go by, the fire truck, he kind of lost his mind, and he ended up chatting up the lady that gave the presentation at the end of the event. And he was asking about the fire trucks, and she mentioned that she knew where they were. She gave Mike the guy's number. They started out with a conversation. Brett realized that there were 2 of the trucks that were there and that they might potentially be bought. So Brett gave me a call. Now, I'm kind of the freaky VW guy. It's pretty well known out there in the world, as well as through the Carchaeology videos and that sort of thing. It's obvious that history of a vehicle is extremely important to me. And, well, Brett caught wind of that, and he knew that through my website, oldbug.com, I had a good idea as to value of classic VWs. So at first he called me just to kind of pick my brain. I mean, here was an opportunity for him to purchase these historic VW trucks. And I wasn't sure exactly where it was coming from at the start, but it sounded like he just wanted advice. He had been offered these trucks, the price seemed reasonable, and he was trying to decide whether he wanted to go for it himself. And when he told me all the details, I said, "Dude, you can't let this slip away. Go grab them now." Unfortunately, now isn't a good time for Brett. So he's in the middle of doing a home remodel. He doesn't have a garage that he can store this stuff in. Plus, all of his money is going to the house. So he didn't have the funds to go after it. He didn't have the space to park them. And when he shared that information with me, I basically said, "Well, I've got the space. I've got the funds." And he connected me with Mike. Now, Mike and I had a great conversation. I told him who I am and what I'm into. I shared with him that I've even had another Kiddie fire truck back in the day, and that I'm a Volkswagen guy. I know what this is all about. This is super interesting to me. And he could sense my enthusiasm for both the trucks. And we struck a deal. So the moment that the deal was struck, I was really super excited. I was ready to wire him the funds the next morning, and he gave me a call and kind of had cold feet. And I understand that. These are things that you've got an emotional tie to. It's something that is kind of hard to let go. And do you want to let these things go to some freaky dude in California rather than keeping them in Chicago? I talked him off the ledge. We continued to work a deal out. I sent him the funds, and then I had to figure out how to get the deal done and get him out of there. So with money on the wire, I started thinking of what's next. Number one, I don't have a ton of space here at the lab. You've seen me get rid of stuff just so I've got room to walk around. And these things are monsters. This thing is 17 foot, 6 inches long. 2 of them would take up a ton of space in the lab, space that I don't really have. And quite frankly, cash I don't really have. So I called up a good friend of mine, Robert Skinner from Skinner Classics up in Northern California. Now, Robert is probably one of the best known Volkswagen bus hunters. All he goes after is split screen buses. He does restorations on them, and his whole thing is rescuing VW buses that have been hidden out there in the world. And he will go anywhere. He's got a truck and a trailer and a wanderlust like nobody I've ever seen. And when I mentioned the situation to him, asked him if he was interested, he said, absolutely. Not only did he say absolutely, he said, let's get in the truck right now and go get him. Now that really, really excited me because we were, well, just a little over a week away from one of the biggest vintage VW bus meets in Southern California, the Octo Fest. Now, this is a show of all split-screen VW buses, 1967 and older, and it is the heartbeat, it is the soul of that whole scene. If it isn't at Octo, it doesn't exist. And these things have never been to Octo. So we jumped in the truck, or actually Robert jumped in the truck along with his wife, Marlo. They drove across the country. I hopped on a plane and I met them there in Chicago to pick these things up. We loaded them up. We started our trip across the country and we kept it quiet from everybody on social media. Now I sneaked a picture here and there so you can maybe see the bell on the front, maybe a little lettering on the door, something like that, but I didn't want to show any complete photos of the trucks at all until they arrived in Long Beach at the show. And while there were a couple of really savvy guys out there that figured out, whoa, that's a Kiddieland truck, I don't think anybody realized that there were two of them. So when we rolled into Long Beach Friday night before the show with two of these things on Robert's big trailer, everybody lost their mind. They were absolutely the hit of the show on Saturday. And even though we were road weary, absolutely worn out, and desperately needing sleep, we told the Kiddieland story to everybody that came along. People posed for photos. They got up in the back of it. And the overall reaction was absolutely overwhelming as to what these trucks were. So after the show, I brought Kiddieland Truck 1 back here to the lab, and Robert took Kiddieland 2 back to his shop in Vacaville, California. And we're going to get them back together once they're both running, driving, detailed, and cleaned up. And we're going to do a photo shoot for a couple of the Volkswagen magazines. Everybody's super excited about the discovery of these trucks because they're something totally unique. It's not something that's been covered in the Volkswagen press. And the condition of these survivor Kiddieland trucks is just downright impressive. So I'm looking forward to getting them both back together for a photo shoot, sharing the story of Kiddieland and of these trucks, and continuing the fun all the way around. So both trucks have been sitting for a number of years. Kiddieland 2, actually, they did fire it up at one point. It's been converted to 12 volt. Kiddieland 1 here is still 6 volt. It spent some time sitting. In fact, I think maybe it's been sitting for about 20 years or so. I know Mike's had it for maybe 8 of those, and he never attempted to run it. So we've got to go through these things, get them running and driving. I'm going to spend some time doing some preservation on the paint, interior, mechanical type stuff. Brakes need to be done on both of them. There's a little bit of rotten wood in the bed here that I need to take care of. There's some paint damage that I'm going to spend a little time with. We're going to get all the lights and functions and everything like that going. And I plan on sharing all of that with you here on Carchaeology. Also, we're realizing that there were actually maybe a lot more of these than we first thought. Obviously, there's the two. We know of one other that was the Fun Fair truck that Robert has now currently. We found another one that was being used by some Arkansas Shriners, I believe. But now we're seeing images of other ones popping up. We also need to research the Darley company and bring up some information on their conversion of these trucks. And so I plan on more history chasing and more backstory and probably some more vintage footage and photographs and stuff in another video. But that's the quick story of the Kiddieland Fire Trucks, a 1959 and 1960 Volkswagen single cab, bought new in Chicago, Illinois, and converted for the Kiddieland Amusement Park by Darley, a manufacturer of fire trucks right in Melrose Park, Illinois. Anyway, that's about 20 minutes of me rambling. Is that enough? Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Keep on digging them up and driving them. Treasure is out there everywhere. Bye-bye.